It's with great pleasure that I welcome our guest today, Dharmesh Shah, founder and CTO at HubSpot. Dharmesh is a wonderful participant in the startup ecosystem and has been for a very, very long time. We have followed each other's work for many, many, many years, and we share an alma mater, MIT. So I'm so thrilled to have you on the show, Dharmesh. Welcome.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, and I think it goes back. It has to be like over 15 years or something like that. I can kind of recall
Oh,
back on the early days when you were just getting this started.
yeah, we were blogging in the beginning, remember?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Malik actually got me started with blogging. He's like, "Yo, you're so opinionated. You have to start blogging." I'm like, "What is blogging?"
Yeah.
So I am going to spend a significant amount of today's show, depending on how much time Dharmesh can spare for us, to really capture his story, his lessons from the trenches, and his insights, both the entrepreneurial journey as well as his insights on angel investing. So those of you who are following this or listening to the recording, that is what you will expect from the next hour or perhaps even a bit more. So we will start at the very beginning of your journey, Dharmesh. Where did you grow up? What kind of upbringing? What kind of circumstances were you raised in? I know you come from a part of India that is particularly entrepreneurial, so I'm sure that has something to do with it. But tell us a bit more about your childhood.
Sure. So I was born in a small town in Gujarat called Ankleshwar. When I say small, I mean like really, really small. So no paved streets, no traffic lights, no hospital. So I was born with a midwife at my mom's family side of the house. And then I lived my early years in the town called Billimora, which is not that far away, also in Gujarat, near Surat, if people are familiar with Gujarat. And the funny thing is, you mentioned entrepreneurship being kind of in the water and in the blood, so to speak. If you had talked to any of my family, any of my friends, anyone that knew me, I would have been kind of picked the last person or least likely to actually ever start a company. That was just not my personality. I was a very quiet kid, and I wasn't, all the kind of attributes people associate with entrepreneurship in terms of being extroverted and being able to sell, being able to kind of hustle and bustle and get things done. I was the exact opposite of those things. So it was kind of a little bit surprising to many, including myself, that I actually would wind up being an entrepreneur. I was an unlikely one. But my childhood was relatively modest. The house that I grew up in my early years didn't have TV, didn't have hot running water, so we had to kind of heat the water up on in a pail and take it to the bathroom to get hot water. So it was modest, I will say. Not, but then my dad came over on a student visa over to the United States, and he came alone because that's how immigration worked back then. My mom and I kind of stayed in India for a little while. And so I got to spend some years when I came over. I think I was 5 or 6 years old, and spent some time here in the States, spent some time in Canada, and then right in high school, the entire family moved back to India for a couple of reasons. One is my grandfather passed away, so we wanted to kind of support my grandmother, and so I had two siblings at the time, and so we all just kind of packed our bags, left Canada, and went back to India, and I enrolled in high school there. So I had high school in India, and did a couple of years of undergrad in India in mechanical engineering, of all things, because I'm not mechanical at all. I have, India is one of those things you kind of take the board exams. At least this is how it works in Gujarat. I think it works there elsewhere. And it's kind of on a rank system, so you get to kind of choose based on what your score is of these kind of disciplines that you have access to. And that was the best kind of engineering-ish thing I could get into. So that's what I did. And I came over, and then we'll kind of get into the entrepreneurial part of the story. But so my parents had, subsequently, while I was an undergrad, moved back to the United States. They were here, living here permanently. And I was living with my grandmother and family in India. And I came to visit them, during the summer of my second year in college. And people had always told me, like, Dharmesh, you really like math, which I do. and so you should check out this quote unquote computer stuff. And it's like, okay, I'd heard of them. My high school had 0 computers. My engineering college, which was a big college, over 1,000 students, had I think 4 computers. And I never got to once touch any of those computers because they were off limits, except for people that were seniors further along. And we don't think about this here in the United States that much, but computers, outside of just buying the computer, which is expensive, running a computer in India is actually expensive because you have to have an air-conditioned room. It has to be relatively clean in order to kind of keep the computer running. So I never got a chance to touch a computer while I was in high school or undergrad. So I came here, and my family was living in Indiana, the state of Indiana, and nearby there was Purdue University, and they had summer classes on like an introduction to computers kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, well, people have always told me I should check this out, so I'm going to go check it out. Enrolled in and this was the proverbial kind of love at first sight moment, right? It's like from the day I first sat down with a computer, I'm like this is it. This is the thing I am meant to do. I am supposed to do. And so even though I had not packed any of my things, I was scheduled to just be there for the summer and go back and kind of resume my engineering college there. I literally I didn't go back, right? I'm like, okay, whatever I need, I'll buy here. And I enrolled myself that fall into undergrad computer science. It's like, this is my path now. And haven't looked back. I was fortunate to kind of find that love, that passion early on. I think I would have probably likely discovered computers, might have been another 5 or 10 years, but it was nice. Not as early as I would have liked. I would have liked to have kind of grown up with it, as my son is now doing. He's 10 years old. But yeah, that's my story. And so then, so I've been in computer software for pretty much most of my professional life. But that's the story.
Yeah. So, and you did University of Alabama for computer science, and then you did an MBA at MIT, yeah?
Yeah, so I started computer science at Purdue for the first years, because that's where my family happened to be, and then I transferred down to, I moved down to Alabama. It's a long story, it's not that great of a story, and then so finished my computer science degree at University of Alabama, Birmingham, and then did my MS in the management of technology at MIT at Sloan.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to what year?
That brings us to, I will say, 93, I'm going to say. Well, no, that catches us up to 2004. 2004, yeah.
2004, okay. So, something happened in between, right? So you must have done something else.
Yeah. So I did 2 startups, right? One in the mid 90s. That was my first one. I was 24 years old at the time. My co-founder was 17 and a half. Didn't know anything about business or startups or financing or anything. This was in Birmingham, Alabama, which was not the kind of startup center of the universe by any stretch of the imagination. And this was, I guess, an early lesson, which is, we automatically assume that entrepreneurship requires this kind of deep kind of well of knowledge, right? That's like, oh, you have to get certified in entrepreneurship in order to be able to go start a company. And yes, it's helpful to know things, and it's amazing the content that you deliver and that's out there now. But back then there was no internet, there was no.
Wasn't there? I have to say, I had to make so many mistakes to learn the basics, which now we can teach in like 1 hour, basically.
I know. It's in a way, it's actually harder for entrepreneurs now than it was then. So then, nobody knew anything. So you weren't really expected to know much if you were a first-time entrepreneur, and you kind of learned as you went, and it was fine. Entrepreneurs today have a little bit harder because there's so much material out there. The expectation is that you have at least absorbed some of the material that's readily available. Otherwise, you're just going to be at a disadvantage versus your peer group. But yeah, I started my first. It was a software company. No surprise there. It was an enterprise CRM in the financial services sector, and bootstrapped it. And kind of, so it was self-funded, and I was the founder, CEO of that company for a little over 10 years, and then ultimately sold it to a much bigger financial services software company, tech company, and then decided to go back to grad school. So that's kind of what happened in the intervening years. But yeah.
And was it a meaningful exit? Were you going into grad school with some money, or were you?
It was. So I'm roughly open and transparent. So the acquisition price was around $15 million, all closely held. And one thing I've kind of discovered about money is that, the kind of the first, and wherever you kind of happen to draw the line based on, what part of the world you live in, different amounts mean different things. But at least for me, like the first $4 or $5 million is like literally just life changing, right? It's like, okay, well, you don't have to work anymore. You have the ability to kind of do a few things. And so once you kind of cross that mark, I wasn't in debt anyway. I don't really believe in debt, but that was a life changing amount of money. And that was kind of partly the motivation for going back to grad school, because during undergrad, I was working full time the whole way through, right? So I take night courses and weekend courses, and it took me 7 years. I almost had to do some of those early classes again because the curricula had kind of expired, later, and they were going to take away some of those credits. But it took me 7 years to get my, what should be a 4-year degree. And so when I went into grad school, I made the deliberate decision that I was going to be like a real student, right? I wasn't going to work. I didn't have to work. I was going to be a legitimate grad student and just apply myself. And I've always loved academics, so this was not a big sacrifice. So and I'd always had this aspiration to go to MIT. That was partly why I moved to the Boston area. And I moved to the Boston area in '99 and didn't apply to MIT until like 5 years later, where the stars kind of aligned. I was able to sell my prior company, which freed up the time and the capital to go do it. But yeah.
Well, and also I think having a little bit of money to bootstrap a company. I mean, I'm kind of bridging into the HubSpot story. To start another company, that's a world of difference, right? You're not scrambling. You're not having to, like we were talking about before we started this conversation. There are a lot of entrepreneurs out there who are bootstrapping with a paycheck right now. So they are working. They're doing what you did during your undergraduate. They're working their day jobs, and they're doing nights and weekends to validate a startup idea. They're also doing all the learning on the job of the methodology building blocks, which now people expect that they would know because there's so much resources out there. So not having to do all that and being able to focus 100% on a venture when you're a bit further along in your journey and have a bit of resources to fund that, first, 18 months, 24 months of your journey makes a massive, massive difference.
Yeah, one thing I'll add. So, I had 2 startups before HubSpot. My first one, and in the first one, it was bootstrapped, self-funded. And then I did a second one before the first one had actually sold. And this is like the biggest mistake of my professional career, is trying to be founder CEO of 2 startups at the same time. But when I did my second one, I had made some money, even though I hadn't had an exit yet. My first company had done reasonably well. And so I wrote the first $1 million seed check for my second startup, right? I'm like, okay, well, I don't have to do the scrappy bootstrap stuff anymore. I've got some cash. I'm just going to self-fund this and do my second startup idea. And the one thing, and the lesson didn't really hit for me until years later, but when I did my second startup, the automatic assumption I had in my head is that everything I did in my first one was a mistake. And because I didn't know anything, because I didn't have access to capital, and so in the second one, I'm like, oh, I'm going to do it completely differently this time. I'm going to start off with $1 million in capital. I'm going to not make some of the quote unquote mistakes. And the lesson learned was a lot of the things I did in that first startup, despite being ignorant about business overall, were the best things, right? It's like, running lean and being, relatively frugal, being kind of mindful and just being focused. All of those were good things. So, and we'll talk about HubSpot in a little bit, but so HubSpot is what happened as a result of not swinging the pendulum too far the other way. So I took the best lessons I got from my first startup. It's like, okay, let's be disciplined about this. But still, it's like, let's be more ambitious. And so it's the best of both worlds in my mind. But that first startup experience, in those 10 years, I learned a lot. And all modesty aside, we got a fair number of things right. We got the culture right. We were focused on the customer and solving real problems. We were scrappy about it. So, and we're trying to carry those into HubSpot now.
Yeah. My take on all this is it's a good idea to think about your entrepreneurial journey, especially early on, in terms of a serial entrepreneurship journey. Very few people have the kind of hits that a Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, or Steve Jobs have had as a first company becoming their life's work.
Yeah.
So I think for most entrepreneurs, thinking of doing something that is more manageable, that you don't have track record, you have no option but to bootstrap. Okay, bootstrap and get to some level of success, and then gradually build on your dream. I mean, one of my favorite case studies is Sridhar Vembu's story. He built this network management software, for 15 years before even starting to build out Zoho. And look at Zoho now; he could do it all without a penny of outside capital. So, so I think that's what you're echoing here, is that you had a lot more flexibility, and basically the point of having some resources is that freedom to be able to do things differently and do things without those existential pressures.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that notion of like kind of serial entrepreneurship, that is fantastically good advice if you keep that in your mind, because and it plays in a couple of ways. One is your first idea does not have to be the kind of world-changing biggest thing. I'm going to go off and try to build this multi-billion-dollar business. It can be something more modest as long as it solves a customer problem and it's real. I think that's completely encouraged and okay. But the other one is when you get to the point of an exit, let's say there's an acquisition possibility. I think too many entrepreneurs sometimes like, oh, well, I'm meant to kind of slog this through all the way until it becomes this huge thing. And that's fine. If you're onto an idea and you're passionate about that idea, I encourage entrepreneurs to stick to it, but there is no shame in saying, hey, this particular idea has kind of run its course. Maybe the company will be in better hands in the acquire. I'll get some money. And I've talked to hundreds of entrepreneurs, not quite as many as you, but not once have I met an entrepreneur that's only had a single idea in their entire life, right? Like entrepreneurs will have other ideas. It's like, okay, you're running this company, you run it with as much focus as you possibly can. But then sometimes it's time to start the second chapter or the next chapter wherever you are on your entrepreneurial journey, and it's okay to do that. Yeah.
So let's come to your third chapter. What was the genesis of HubSpot? What was going on in the industry, and what was going on in your life and your orbit that led to HubSpot? Yeah,
so HubSpot, first of all, was not supposed to happen. When I sold my first company, I had promised my wife that I'm not going to do startups anymore, right? It's like, okay, I've made the money I needed to make, but I had for 10 years, as long as she'd known me, because we had been together since before I'd even started a company, right? When I was still working as an engineer. So she had no idea that I was going to be an entrepreneur, and no one would have guessed that. So when I sold it after 10 years, I'm just like, okay, well, I don't need to work anymore. So my plan was to go to graduate school, get my master's degree, probably go get my PhD, and then go teach. That was the original plan. And so that was kind of step one, is going to MIT and going into grad school. But then the best laid plans, as they say. So while in grad school, I met my co-founder, Brian Halligan, and we just both had a shared passion for small and medium-sized businesses. We both came from tech, but had different. He came from a kind of sales and marketing background. I came from kind of product and engineering. And the one kind of observation, and this is while we're in class at MIT, right? So that's where HubSpot was essentially born. We had a thesis that was emerging, which is that marketing was kind of broken. The way most companies marketed, it's like, oh, I've got this budget, however big or small, I'm going to spend this budget to kind of take my message and kind of broadcast it to the world, right? I'm going to buy a long list of email addresses. I'm going to buy a long list of phone numbers and have people cold call. I'm going to take ads out if I can. I'm going to, on newspapers or on based on how big your budget was, TV shows or whatever it is. And all those methods have been fine for decades, but that over time, they had become less and less effective. And this is marketing that we call outbound marketing, right? You're kind of pushing your message out. Yeah. And the reason they were less effective is because humans got better at blocking marketing messages, right? We don't open spammy email anymore. We don't answer random calls without looking at caller ID. And we just are kind of immune to classic marketing. And so our thesis was now that the internet is here, there is a better way for companies to market, which is not based on how much money you have. It's based on how creative and how value adding you are, right? So start a blog, put a video out there, help your prospective customers learn the things they need to learn in their industry. And this is what we call inbound marketing, and we coined the term. And so the idea is take that same budget, however big or small, and instead of spending it all trying to blast the world with your message, spend it on creating value for your prospective customers, however that might be, in whatever media or channel you prefer. And that's a much more effective, sustainable way to grow a business. So that was the thesis. As it turns out, so we were right about that thesis, but the products needed to kind of execute on that and do inbound marketing and existed for big companies and sophisticated companies, but didn't really exist for mere mortal kind of small. If you were a 30-person law firm or a 50-person manufacturing firm, you didn't likely have the wherewithal to say, oh, I'm going to put WordPress up as a blog and I'm going to connect it to Google Analytics. I'm going to use Wufoo for my forums. I'm going to use this tool over here to post my blog to social media. And I'm going to try and pull all the analytics together and figure out which of my marketing efforts are working or not. The tools were out there and they were great tools, but no one had really pulled it all together. And so that was the genesis of HubSpot. That said, can we make it easy for a small and medium-sized business to kind of get on the internet instead of sitting on the sidelines? They should be enjoying the benefits of this connected world and being able to kind of connect to their customers in much more efficient ways and grow. Can we make that possible for them? So that was the kind of idea behind it.
Dharmesh, put this in the timeline for us, and let's brainstorm a little bit about what was happening in the outer universe while you and Brian were hatching this.
Yep. So I'll take you back. So it's around 2005. The big term back then was Web 2.0. Tim O'Reilly had just coined. So there was this entire emergence around this kind of what Web 2.0 was essentially the second generation of the web, which is the first generation was people are putting simple websites up there in brochureware and things like that. Web 2.0 was essentially the interactive web, that instead of it just being static content, you could actually have applications on the web and do things. So that's what was happening. Salesforce was still a relatively young company. But Google Analytics existed, WordPress existed, but and some companies were leveraging the web. We take kind of blogging and all that for granted, but back in 2005, it was a relatively new thing. And the people that blogged, they didn't blog for business, right? They blogged for
in 2005. You were already blogging, right, in 2005?
I started in 2005, yeah.
Me too. So I think we both started blogging at the same time, because I guess that's when I started following you and you started following me, because there weren't that many people blogging, and blogging was not really understood because I just discovered blogging. I mean, I started blogging just as I discovered blogging. So I don't think people really understood blogging. So part of the inbound marketing thesis was that you were doing content marketing, you were producing content.
Yes.
Well, blogging kind of leads us into that concept, right?
It does, and there's actually an interesting kind of story in between, which is goes to the genesis. So recall that we had this, Brian and I had this idea that marketing was kind of broken, that it needed to shift from outbound to inbound marketing. He's like, okay, great. And Brian graduated a year ahead of me, so he graduated in 2005. And his first job after graduation was to work as an entrepreneur in residence at a venture capital firm here in the Boston area. And his job was to take all these portfolio companies and help them grow, right? And because he'd been VP of sales, he'd worked in sales and marketing his whole professional career. And he and I would still meet like weekly and just talk about kind of general ideas. And I was working on my thesis at MIT, trying to finish my academic work up. And here's the thing that kind of struck us both. So he was helping these portfolio companies, but then he would look at the traffic I was getting on my blog. He's like, Dharmesh, what are you doing on your blog that's getting all this traffic? I have these venture-backed rich people that have VPs of marketing, these are real companies with real budgets doing real marketing, and yet you're getting 10 times the traffic on your blog. Like, how is that? And my response was, oh, well, there's this kind of skill or this discipline called search engine optimization, where you can optimize your content so that you show up in Google search results. There are these new social media sites like Reddit, which had just started in that time frame. And so that way people, you kind of get traffic from all these different sources. And so this is when Brian said, oh, well, my portfolio companies need to do this. Like, whatever you're doing on your blog, let's go do it over here in all these portfolio companies. I'm like, oh, piece of cake. You put WordPress up, you put Google Analytics up, here are all those 18 things you need to do in order to kind of get online. And he's like, oh man, that's a science project. They don't have the time for that, right? Their developers are off building their product. They don't have the time to go off and figure out all this technology to make this happen. And so that was the kind of proverbial kind of spark, right? Which is, we identified that there was this kind of business issue, this trend in the market where marketing was kind of broken, but the existing products, although great, were not easy enough, were not simple enough to for most companies to use, and said, okay, so we'll go build that. And we, some of the best entrepreneurial advice I've given and I've heard is, when you're starting off as an entrepreneur, do like one thing really, really well. Like do that one thing and get really good at it, which is, I think, is brilliant advice. HubSpot in its at its genesis did the exact opposite, right? We said, okay, we're going to build a blogging tool and social media and analytics and like all of it, and a website creator all on one platform. And when I get asked like, okay, well, why would you do something so crazy? And our response is that, the whole reason for HubSpot to exist, the problem as we saw it, was not that there weren't these tools out there. So we could have picked any one of those and said, well, we're not going to build a better analytics than Google Analytics or a better blog than WordPress. That's not the problem customers have. The problem is this stuff is just too hard. In order for us to make it easy, we're going to have to build all of it in an integrated way, the same way Apple might do, is to say, okay, in order to get non-consumers consuming, when they came out with the iPod, it wasn't, we can hold more gigabytes or the gigabytes per dollar. It wasn't any of that. It was like, in order to enjoy digital music at that time, it's like you had to sort of know about technology, what an MP3 file was, and go to Napster or some of these illegal websites in order to get the music on your device. Like most people couldn't enjoy digital music. And Apple said, hey, we're going to give you a device, for sure you need that, but we're going to also have this software called iTunes, and we're also going to have content partnerships with all the music studios. And so we're going to allow millions of people to enjoy digital music. It's not like they invented the MP3 player. They just made it accessible. And we didn't invent the marketing stack or marketing tools. We just made them accessible to an audience or a group of companies that just couldn't cross that line before. That was a...
So, Dharmesh, one question that comes to my mind here is how much of those existing tools were you able to bring into your product design as that first, let's say version 1 of HubSpot? Was it possible to integrate WordPress into that product, Google Analytics into that product, or did you have to do all of that from scratch?
We did it from scratch, and this, and here was our, it's in hindsight, entrepreneurs are really good at rationalizing past actions, but our thinking was that we could have tried to take WordPress and Google Analytics and kind of integrate them into this kind of larger platform, but then we wouldn't have been able to control the user experience in a way that we needed to control, right? So, and once again, this is like the Apple way, it's kind of a fully integrated experience versus kind of cobbling together a bunch of different pieces, because you have to kind of control the boundaries and be able to control the user experience in order to make it easy enough. And that was what we thought our overall mission was. And so we didn't build Google Analytics into it. We actually recreated it. We recreated WordPress. We recreated everything. And every line of code essentially was kind of built from scratch, which had some implications, right? The big downside was the product was kind of 9 miles wide and like 2 inches deep. And so every one of its categories, the product sucked, right? Like if you look at every individual piece of HubSpot back in those years, they wouldn't even make the top 3, top 4 in that category. And that was both deliberate and unavoidable. We didn't have the engineering staff or the resources, or we had the time. Let's say we had infinite money to have the leading blogging application, or the leading social media, or the leading analytics. And one of the weird things I told the team back then is that if we have any one of our, let's say, 8 tools that is the number 1 or number 2 in its category, then we have misallocated resources, because that is not the goal. The goal is not to be number 1 or 2. The goal is to have this breadth, and the kind of sum of the parts. The whole is greater than sum of the parts. So, and over time, this is, we raised capital and obviously, built out the product and engineering team. Over time, those individual tools now are most of them are in the top 3 in their individual categories, but that was not the case for the first 5-7 years of the company.